So I suggested Sanders would win big in Washington, and he did. I refrained from making any suggestions about Alaska, and I suggested that Clinton should be favored in Hawaii based on the results in the other Pacific Island primaries. So my Hawaii argument was based on the idea that Hawaii would vote similarly to other Pacific Island states, but it was never presented with much confidence. There wasn't any polling done, and the demographic modeling is anti-scientific and should be rejected. I always said that this idea was preliminary and subject to modification by incoming data. All anybody could have given you was an inference, that is a guess. One could have argued that Sanders should have won because it was a caucus, but Hawaii has secret ballots, so that logic of peer pressure is kind of funny. Nor is Hawaii a white state, so all of the modeling and everything, like it didn't. There wasn't another state with a population like Hawaii's. So even if you suggested that the best that any of the demographic modeling could have done would have been like a rather clearly fallacious type of thinking, right? So I made a guess, but it turned out not to be right. And actually, I think the better analysis is likely to invert my argument. I had essentially suggested that Clinton should be favored because of greater name recognition in what is really a distant colony. And that was the pattern in the other Pacific Island states. I guess it was Northern Marianas, and there was another Pacific Island region that Clinton had won as well. And if you look at the results, the way that Clinton had won it was in such a way as to indicate that Sanders was not really well known, right? So she'd win like 58 to 23 or something, right? Indicating that there was like a large amount of the population that voted for somebody else, or maybe it was like a write-in local candidate or whatever. It didn't seem as though Sanders was getting any kind of media out there at all, sort of thing, right? In the absence of any polling, it seemed, somewhat reasonable to suggest that it should be roughly the same kind of pattern, right? But what I'm suggesting, when you look at it, it was probably the other way around. What was probably true in the end was that the name recognition worked against her, which was to say it was probably less about a vote for Sanders and more about a vote against Clinton. It doesn't look like turnout was low. And if you look at the numbers, they added up to 100, right? So it kind of adds up to that sort of result. But for substantive policy, if there was an actual policy issue, how about the Asia pivot? Maybe concerned about Clinton starting a war in the Pacific. There's no polling, so all I can do is make stuff up. So what I'm suggesting, like I say, I initially suggested that what was probably going to be true was that nobody knew who Sanders was in Hawaii, so Clinton would win because of that. I've never heard Sanders talk at all about Hawaii. I doubt there was really any media directed. I know that one of the was it Tulsi Gabbard, but I mean, how big of an effect would that really have? So that was my argument, right? But what I'm suggesting is, okay, maybe it was the other way around. Maybe Clinton's policies are so unpopular that there was kind of an anybody but Clinton mindset that sunk in. Because, I mean, the reality is that Hawaii is right in the middle of harm's way in the case of a Pacific war. Clinton has been very aggressive about a containment policy regarding China. She won't call it a containment policy, but I mean, it's just more Orwellian language coming out of it. It's quite obviously a containment policy. The Chinese know it's a containment policy. Every analyst who's using their brain knows it's a containment policy. And in fact, the State Department knows that it's a containment policy. This idea of pretending that it's anything but a containment policy is just nonsense. And it's nonsense on the level of nonsense. Everybody knows it's nonsense. There's no use in pretending otherwise, right? So Clinton was very involved with this whole Asia pivot. And if I lived in Hawaii, I would be concerned about that. Okay, because it does look like Clinton wants to start a war in in Hawaii, right? Or sorry, not in Hawaii, but like in the Pacific region. And I mean, I would want to vote against that. And if you look at what um, Tulsi Gabbard was actually saying, and you read between the lines a little, that's kind of, it sounds like that's what she was really saying too. Okay, so that's, initially I was thinking, okay, nobody knows who Bernie Sanders is. Clinton will win on name recognition. Maybe it was the other way around. It was everybody knows who Clinton is, and nobody wanted her to be president, so her opponent won by default. That's what I'm thinking. But I mean, I'm inferring things. There was no data to begin with. There's no data now. I mean, well, I should be careful here. I remember when I was in school, one of my professors made a point to remind us that we were not mathematicians yet. And the truth is, I have not worked a day as a mathematician. So, but I did go to school for a very long time, long enough that in terms of bulk courses completed, I wouldn't be talking about a master's degree, but a PhD. So I studied a lot of math for a really long time, and so I lost my train of thought there. What I meant to say was that I was going to say I'm a mathematician, but then I stopped and I said, well, maybe I should become a little bit more careful about what I call myself here. The point was that I'm not a clairvoyant. I'm reading numbers. And if I don't have numbers, then there's not a lot that I can do, right? I can take a guess, but I reject the kind of predictive modeling that you see people do. I think it's anti-scientific. There's other ways to go about it. Even if I didn't, that would have been useless anyways, because it's a state that's unlike any other state. There is no other state like Hawaii. The closest to a state like Hawaii would have been the Pacific Island states or primaries that I was trying to draw information from. And if you were going to model it and were going to do predictive modeling, you would have wanted to base it on that information, not information in Alabama. But that said, there wouldn't have been enough information to build in a useful model anyways. So we really had nothing to go on with Hawaii. I do think that the approach I took was superior, but in the end it didn't work out. Okay. Either way, that buffers the loss in Arizona a little. I had suggested he'll probably, well, I had really refrained from making a prediction in Hawaii or Alaska. I just pointed out, wait a second here. The data that we have for the lower 48 is likely not applicable to Hawaii or Alaska, so let's be careful about drawing conclusions. Let's assume that they split. He did better than a split, so that helped them up. He came out of that a little bit better than he could have, and that helped buffer the loss in Arizona a little. Even still, he lost in Arizona by a lot more than even the worst estimates would have suggested, I think. I think that I was expecting a worst case scenario would be Clinton around 55. So he's about 25 delegates behind where I said he should be. I also suggested that he only really needs to split Wisconsin, though. So that's the next state up. He's about 25 behind where I said he should be. I said he needed to split Wisconsin, so now he needs to do better in Wisconsin. My logic or my argument was, you look at Wisconsin, it's kind of halfway between Minnesota and Illinois. Is it going to be more like Minnesota, or is it going to be more like Illinois? He did quite well in Minnesota, not as well in Illinois. I said, let's split the difference. Now Wisconsin needs to behave more like Minnesota than Illinois is in order to make up the difference. And he does still need to be aiming for around 200 going into New York. If he does really well in Wisconsin, and I mean everybody expects him to win in Wyoming, whatever that means, the 12 delegates or whatever it is. But hey, that's if he can make up 10 delegates there, that's better than a poke in the eye, right? So that helps too. But he's got to make up more in Wisconsin than I initially suggested, and he still needs to be aiming for around 200 as a difference going into New York. And he absolutely must win New York. Okay? There's no question he's got to win New York. Now, I would not advise taking early polls seriously, but it is a closed primary. That's bad. And the results in Massachusetts and Illinois, which were not closed primaries, but are going to be roughly similar to New York in most ideological measurements, that would suggest a split is more likely than a win. So that's what you have to keep in mind going into New York, is that, again, nothing's changed. He still has to win New York, there's no question. But judging on what we've seen up to this point, I would temper your enthusiasm. Don't give up. Keep trucking there, but because I'm a person of numbers, I need to be realistic. It's not the numbers don't look good for Bernie in New York at this point, but we'll see how things turn out. History shows us that a strong regional architecture can bring to bear incentives for cooperation and disincentives for provocation and problematic behaviors. But this kind of architecture does not just spring up on its own. Just as NATO and other aspects of the post-World War II architecture didn't just happen. It takes consistent effort, strong partnerships, and crucially American leadership. And that is, at core, what our strategy in the Asia-Pacific is all about. All of our actions, diplomatic, economic, and military, are designed to advance the school. Let me offer 3 examples about how it works. I'm going to skip the first example, and I'm going to abridge the second example. Here's a second example, which demonstrates how strong rules and norms matter in people's lives. Strong rules and the enforcement of norms. As part of that same trip last November, the president built momentum for a new far-reaching trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that we are negotiating with 8 other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. This agreement is not just about eliminating barriers to trade. It's not. Will it eliminate barriers to trade at all? Although that is crucial for boosting U.S. exports and creating jobs in the United States. So she thinks the TPP will create jobs. It's also about agreeing on the rules of the road for an integrated Pacific economy that is open, free, transparent, and fair. She's talking about the TPP. It will put in place strong protections for workers, really. The environment, right? It will put in very strong rules for intellectual property. And we can't even talk about innovation in this context, but she claims it will, all key American values, and it will cover emerging issues such as the connectivity of regional supply chains. That's very much true. The competitive impact of state-owned enterprises. That's some doublespeak. And create trade opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses. Right. See, here's the thing. I actually think that Clinton probably actually believes that. However you want to interpret this, okay? Either she is lying through her teeth, or she's out to lunch. Either way is not particularly flattering. Okay, you could interpret it. She's lying. She's clueless. Or sorry, well, you could have this. Let's do this one thing at a time. Okay, so you could have this perception that you know she's lying. She's diabolical. She knows exactly what the TPP said, and she's trying to tell you exactly the opposite of what it actually says. That's one perspective. It makes for good drama. It's good theater, right? But I don't think it really adds up with the evidence that we have in front of us. I think that the evidence we have in front of us, first of all, she claims that she hadn't read the agreement, right? She wasn't involved in writing it, which is probably technically true. Um, and she said that she wasn't going to support it or oppose it. She wanted to wait until it came out first, right? But here we have her claiming it's this great thing. I believe her when she says she really didn't know what it said. So what is this? What is this that she's telling us? The answer is that it's a load of claptrap that was given to her by her handlers. And she's essentially just reading a bunch of stuff off of a sheet of paper. And that's how you make sense of all of these contradictions, okay? I don't think she is the diabolical monster that it's easy to portray her as for, the purposes of theater. But I think that if you really look into this, it's pretty clear that she's really not as closely involved in the actual writing of any of this as her supporters may claim either. That in essence, her job is to be a spokesperson. And that's what she did for a lot of her period in office. The question that's not as clear, or doesn't have as clear of an answer in my mind, is what role she plays in putting in place the people around her. Is it a situation where she determines who the people around her are, and then she delegates everything and then just, stands up on the podium? Or is it the case where the people around her are put in place by a structure, by a system that also put her in place? And she's just reading lines and cashing checks. But I mean, this isn't as facile as saying, look, she supported this, he supports that. Vote for Bernie because he supports this. Don't vote for her because she supports that, right? The contradictions that have built up on top of themselves regarding the specific issue open up a lot more questions about just exactly what a Hillary Clinton presidency would really be like. Because if she did have some concept of what the negotiations were about and what the agreement was about, then first of all, she is lying here. She doesn't understand what the trade agreement is about. Sorry. Let me be clear. Okay, so if I see that this is why I like to write things down. Okay, I didn't write this down. This is very off the cuff. It's very obvious. I'm stumbling over my words here. Okay, so let's suppose that she was involved in the writing. Okay, then she is lying to us about what it's about because she knows that it's not going to increase workers' rights or be good for the environment, right? If she's involved in writing it, she knows that. So she's lying to us about this. Her speech is a lie. And then she's lying to you about not being involved with it, right? If she's telling the truth about not really being involved with it, which I think is probably correct, then she's pretending that she knows what she's talking about based on information that was handed to her. And I think that that's the more realistic analysis, the more realistic reading. Okay? And that's the problem. So I don't think she's lying when she says the TPP will be good for workers and good for the environment and will create jobs. I think she actually believes the information that's given to her, and she has a lot of faith in the system around her. And while I don't want to fall into this, knuckle dragging, discussion about strong leadership, a little bit of greater initiative should be a prerequisite for somebody who wants to be the president of the global empire. So that's, I think that as time goes on, the codes will require more and more analysis. They won't be just strict recitations like they have been up to now, because they will require a little bit more analysis. I've avoided that up to this point because I wanted to get the obvious stuff down first, but as we go, I'm going to need to do a little bit more of this. So there we go. There's some more shit that Hillary actually said, but it might not be shit that Hillary actually wrote. So this article came up at NPR. It's looking at West Virginia and Kentucky. This is its argument for West Virginia. The Democratic primary was 96% white in 2008. Therefore, Sanders should win? That's your argument? Because white people are predisposed, I suppose? It's the same thing in Kentucky. Kentucky's primary was nearly 90% white. So because of their genetics, they must be predisposed towards voting for the Jew, I guess, right? It's the kind of thing that drives me crazy. Okay, that's their argument. It's just the percentage of how many white people there are, and they think they can make a decision based on this is ridiculous. All right, and in fact, I already debunked this, but I'll do it again, specifically as it applies to West Virginia and Kentucky. It's racist. Your argument is racist, okay? And it's racist, and it's what NPR is doing. It's not just NPR. Over and over again, media outlet after media outlet, it's a racist analysis, and it should be challenged strenuously. These are conservative, deep southeastern states. The white population in these states, and also in Indiana, which the article completely ignored, should be expected to behave the same way as the white populations in the similar states around them. That is Tennessee and Virginia and southern Ohio too. And Clinton carried the white population in these states by very large margins. 65, 70%, okay? We'll do this again. These were results from March 1st. You can see that Clinton got about the same in all of them, but the number of white people fluctuated all over the place. 80, 67, 46, 61. That's only a couple of states. I could bring a few more in as well. Okay? But what you see when you look at those results is that support for Clinton does remain stable while race fluctuates. And what that means is that race is not a predictive variable. That is a proof. Okay? We could work it out, we could do the math. Okay? But looking at that is a proof. Okay? If you'd rather it be done, with lines, or with algebra, that's fine. If you understand, then that's enough. Okay? But the media will not cease, nor will they desist. The media is racist. It is a part of their job to be racist. And they must be called out on it at every opportunity. Voters make decisions based on the content of their characters, not on the color of their skins. And all meaningful evidence suggests that Clinton should be expected to carry the white vote in Kentucky, in West Virginia, and in Indiana by significant to overwhelming margins. Now, that doesn't mean it's over. Like I say, I think that he can do well in Maryland, and I think that he could do better in California than this article suggests. I also think he can do better in New York, or at least I suggest that he must do better in New York. But I mean, broadly speaking, besides that, and I mean, they try to use the same logic. If there's more black people, then therefore. But I mean, that was debunked in Illinois as well, and Missouri. If you were looking purely at the demographics, Clinton would have won those states. She would have been pushing 60% in both of them. It's not as clear the other way around because there haven't been a lot of states with black liberals. All the states that have had black voting bases have been in the South, and they've been very conservative. So it comes up as a proxy variable, right? The situations where we've been able to get kind of a better handle on things, Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, have indicated that I think that Sanders actually won the black vote under 50 in Illinois. He has a hard time with older black people, but he has a whole hard time with older white people too. And I think that what you may be seeing come out in those numbers is that voter turnout amongst young black people is startlingly low, right? And so because if voter turnout amongst the young black people is very low, then what you will see is that the only, well, not the only, but you will see a disproportionate number of older you will see a disproportionate number of black voters being older. So it will skew higher to the older age groups than the other demographics will. And that's why you see these numbers come up the way they do. But the only thing that you can really state with any objective truth is one, that Sanders does have a hard time with older voters, whether they're white or black, and two, Sanders does have a hard time with Southern voters, whether they're white or black, because they tend to lean to the right. There is no reason to expect anything that's come up to be predictive for the results in New Jersey or New York. Maryland is a little bit fishier because it's kind of a bit further down, but I mean, New Jersey is a northern state. New York is a northern state. If there's an issue in New York that Sanders is going to be fighting against, it's not race, it's class. There's a lot of wealthy Democrats in New York. That's his larger issue in New York. We'll see how that works out. But I mean, if you're talking about upstate New York, where people are largely doing pretty good, the kind of logic that may have prevailed 30, 40 years ago is not around anymore amongst Democrats in the upper middle classes. They're not really liberals. They're middle of the road, moderate conservatives, and Hillary is their horse. It makes sense, right? And I mean he has a fight there. He can win young people. He can win black people. If he gets plowed in Albany, then You know, it's the upstate parts of New York that are gonna hurt him, right? So you'll see how that works out. And again, like I say, it's a close primary, so you have to be members of the Democratic Party to vote in this election in New York, and that's going to hurt Bernie a lot in New York, where there's that upper crust establishment that's going to dominate a lot of the voting. So I'm not saying he is going to win, but it's not. It does if it doesn't have anything to do with skin color, and it's not going to have anything to do with skin color. But I mean, even if you want to have this argument, you have to look at the facts, and the facts are that is debunked. Okay, you can make the argument if you want, but don't try to tell me that the data supports it, because it doesn't at all. And we've seen it fail. So we've seen it fail as a predictive modeling, and it seems to be that the more that it fails, the more that the media repeats it, right? I mean, this was an idea that came out of, like, what was it, like there were like 6 states that had voted, and they were all in the same region. And you think that you can create a model out of that you can. Maybe I should be clear. I don't think you can create a model at all. The idea that you can create a model and it will predict, I don't think that's possible. I think that you need to look at each state on a state-by-state basis. An election is not, there's no physical law underlying an election. It's not a physics problem. It's a math problem, sure, but it's not the kind of thing where you can come up with a law. You can't generalize this and then take that rule and then apply it. Okay, what you're looking for, I'm not just rejecting the rule that you've come up with. I'm rejecting the idea that there is a rule. Okay. Now, what you will find over, like when you get to the last state, your model might work, but I mean, it's just, it's not, because it's basing it really on anything except, the brute force of all these other states, right? If there's one state left, and one of the candidates is winning, 47-3, well, then you can make a pretty good prediction that they will win because they won the last 47 states, right? Or they won 47. There's 50 of them. All right, so 47-2. They've won 47 of the last 49 states. You can make a pretty good prediction that they'll win the last one too, right? Not because of any skin color or whatever, And when the predictions do work out, it's going to have more to do with that, right? And sort of more the broad kinds of things that are around the specific states, right? I do think that you can do that. You can make a prediction on a state-by-state basis. You can say, this state has voted for this for the last 30 years, so it would make sense that they would do that again. But to say that, black people in Georgia voted for one candidate, so therefore black people in Alaska should vote for that's racist. Okay, that's what that is. It's racist. And if that's your thinking, then you're a racist. And, you might not realize it, but, look at yourself in the mirror, take a couple of glasses a couple of shots of scotch, shake it off, drop it and move on. It's racist. And, if you want to argue in favor of racism, then do it. If not, stop promoting racist ideas. Okay? Bernie does have a path, but he's going to lose in those states. And you'll have to deal with that. We all will.